Good day, folks, and welcome to Not Just Business. You would have noticed that we've been absent or missing in action for a few weeks, but I suppose inaction's the operative word because we have been busy. But here we are again, back to this episode. Since we last spoke, my colleague Siham, Boda, and I have won the international negotiation competition, unofficial. We'll tell you more about that right now. We're going to speak about what it takes to win a negotiation competition and some advice on what our future plans are. So to give you some background, this competition was started by two professors, Remy Smolinski from the Leipzig Graduate School of Management in Germany, and Peter Kesting, who's an associate professor at Aarhus University in Denmark. They've been running this competition for 15 years, the student version, open only to full-time or part-time registered students from all over the world, from some of the best business schools from all over the world. Unfortunately, only once was Africa ever represented in the competition. There was a team from Kenya a couple of years ago. So this year they decided to expand the competition to professionals, professional negotiators, business people, anybody who does negotiations for a living, which probably means everybody in business. So let me bring in my colleague, Siham. So Siham, you got us involved in this competition. Tell us how you did that.
Hi, Derek. It seems very new age, actually. I was scrolling through LinkedIn and I noticed a post by Professor Barney Jordan, who is situated at Vlerick University in Belgium. He was a professor here at the Graduate School of Business at UCT. That's where I met him. And I noticed this post where he was advertising the negotiation challenge competition. And I thought it was very interesting. And they indicated a team should enter. And it was the middle of lockdown and things were getting a bit boring in terms of fun activities. I could only do so many more online quizzes and that sort of thing. So I reached out to you and I said, hey, Derek, how do you feel about doing a international negotiation competition? And before I even told you what it entailed, you're like, that's great. I'm in. Let's go.
Yeah.
And that's how we got in.
I suppose I was also tired of online chess by that stage. It's a new hobby of mine, by the way. We entered it. I was very eager to do that, not just to try and prove how good we were, but to learn. I think that's the main thing. To quote famous negotiator, whose name escapes me now, who said, negotiation skills are perishable. If you don't use them, you'll lose them. And I think we found that in our very first negotiation, we actually stumbled a bit because we were out of practice, So here we were in this competition and nobody was more surprised than us probably when we actually won the thing. So we're now officially, or rather officially the unofficial world champions. What do you think about that? And what does that mean to you?
I just think it was such a wonderful opportunity to meet like-minded professionals from all over the world who consider negotiation to be a skill and not something you wing or just wing along, that you prepare for. And there's a fair amount of thought that goes into it. So it was, for me, an absolute privilege to be able to negotiate, with people from the United States, Europe. I think we had people from Japan, all sorts of differences in culture, language ability, and all sorts of challenges. And then, of course, having to do it online. So I think for me, it was just a great opportunity to have a lot of fun without having to leave your home and incur the costs that one would normally have to incur to participate in something like this. So for me, it was just really great to meet like-minded people who value and see the importance of good negotiation skills.
So I think world champion is probably a bit of an exaggeration. Of course, we'll take it. It sounds nice to be world champions at the same time as our beloved rugby team are world champions as well. But we're wise enough and experienced enough to know that one of the basic rules is don't believe your own PR. We can always improve. And they certainly didn't score perfectly in everything. We picked that up. We know where we could improve. But, looking at the two of us, people would have thought they're so different. We are different. Age, ethnic background, we're different in gender, of course. We're different in negotiation style and absolutely different in almost every respect. And yet, like our rugby team, we work well as a team. So What do you think this difference or this diversity just between the two of us, how do you think that helped or hindered us as a team?
Derek, I think it was actually the winning formula, because if I look at, apart from the last team that we negotiated with, who were also a very diverse team, a lot of the other team members were homogenous on some level. And in South Africa, we get caught up in thinking diversity in terms of race. But I think our team just showed how necessary it is to think about diversity much, much more broadly. So, for example, the age component was massive because of your life experience, and what I've experienced in a different generation was really helpful. Because if you looked at some of the role plays, some of them spanned many generations and you could remember some things, whereas some of the role plays that were more current and dealing with a lot of technology, not that anyone to be shy about technology, but I sort of understood the buying patterns and that sort of thing because I'm within that generational cohort. So just if you look at age, I think that's the one thing, was just understanding the role plays. Then if we look at other things like ethnic backgrounds and that sort of thing, one of the other competitors was a Muslim chap from the Maghreb, the Sahel region. I recognized his name and we could speak about that for a little bit. So just in terms of creating rapport, because there was that recognition in terms of where he was from, that made a difference, I think. And I think if you've got that diversity, it just brings more resources to the table in terms of building that rapport, looking for understanding, and also to see what's important. And if you've got someone who has a different pair of eyes than you, they might see another need or an interest that you might not necessarily pick up on very quickly. And then I think one of the biggest benefits of our diverse talent was your numerical skills, because a lot of these negotiations that were given to us were commercial in nature, and we really needed to get the numbers right. So just to have your help in terms of crunching the numbers and making sure we had accuracy in terms of where we knew our walkaway points were and that sort of thing, I think was really key and critical to us being able to win, because we crunched the numbers so well because of your skill. We knew where we could give away other concessions that could buy us a lot of goodwill, therefore increase our profits.
To add to that, I mean, your calm style, I remember getting not ruffled once. I was a little bit, let's say, I feigned anger because it was necessary at the time, but I can do that. You were much more softer. So I think in a certain way, we do play good cop, bad cop from time to time, which is not something that we recommend to people we train in general. Good negotiators see past that. But yeah, we are. So I'm the grumpy. I mean, I played Rupert Murdoch in one of the role plays because they probably thought you look a bit like him and you act a bit like him. So anyway, this diversity, I think, is bringing lessons for business in South Africa. The first lesson, the obvious one, don't go into a negotiation alone. You're going to miss a lot of things. You need a partner, at least one. I see in the student competition, they actually have teams of 3. In the professional competition, they have teams of 2, but you need to be at least 2 if you go into any kind of negotiation. In fact, the general theory is that you should put your second best negotiator, let them do the talking, and the best one sits and watches and observes. And, when you get a break, they give you feedback. So what were your impression of the competition, the teams and the interaction?
It was absolutely delightful. There was such a range of skilled professionals participating in the competition. Many of them had done the student competition in years past. So they were fairly familiar with the format and that sort of thing. So I think in that regard, you and I were probably at a little bit of a disadvantage because many of them, I would say the majority, had done student competitions in years gone by. But I mean, they were such a fantastic cohort of people, and they worked in a range of different industries, from oil and gas to business design to engineering, international affairs. Some were their own entrepreneurs working in banking. Others were economists working for aeronautical engineering companies. So not your run-of-the-mill professional. They were highly ambitious. Most of them had completed an MBA. at some point. And, they all strive to get the best out of any deal. So it was really interesting, I found, negotiating with this particular cohort of competitors.
It's interesting how much better and easier it is to negotiate with people who know how to negotiate. Some negotiators, I use the word loosely in inverted commas, would look for weaknesses in another team. It depends how you view negotiation. If you think it's a pie, it's a fixed pie and you've got to share it. And what the other side gets, you don't get. There's going to be a tug of war and rip the pie to pieces. If you see it as something that you can grow, and then when you eventually split it, each side will get a lot more than they had before. Proper negotiators can try and work out solution to a problem. Poor negotiators, I think, try to beat the other guy. The competition is very interesting because you have to win, but your opponents have to win too. The skill is to make it really worthwhile for them, but to make it really, really worthwhile for yourself.
I can't agree with you more, Derek. I find in South Africa, often when I'm negotiating, I spend half the time in advocacy mode, trying to share with the other side what the possibilities could be, because most people go into it in what I say is an extractive mindset. They just want to see what they can extract and gain from the interaction rather than looking for mutual opportunity. Because sometimes what I often try to convey is seeking an opportunity for the other side might not cost me anything, but it might bring great benefit to them. And if you look at your problem or your negotiation that you're facing in that way, it's a completely different ballgame. I can just reflect back to a month ago when I was attending to a matter in the High Court. Stupid matter, silly matter, should never have seen the light of day in court. However, dealing with an opponent who just had that very extractive, assertive mentality of I win, you lose. And at the end of the day, the outcome was in my client's favor. However, it wasn't the best deal that my client could have gotten. Had we negotiated, the deal that could have been reached would have been better for both parties. But there just isn't that mental agility that we have. So just to go back to answering your question again, one of the most fantastic thing about negotiating with these other professionals is right off the starting blocks, they understood that way of thinking, and we could get into the negotiations, which was so engaging and stimulating to see where we could end up without having to worry about the advocacy aspects of it.
Exactly. So I can't emphasize that strongly enough. I think you have. Unfortunately, in our boardrooms, not only in South Africa, probably all over the world, there's just too much testosterone. People are sometimes more intent on just winning or just making life difficult for the other side because they don't like them. They would rather get less as long as the other side gets even less. One gets the impression they're not really interested sometimes in really win-win deals because I don't mind not winning, but as long as you lose more than me. I've come across that sort of attitude more than once. So what do the judges look for? I mean, okay, let's have, first of all, before you enter the competition, I think they will ask you, what sort of training have you had? What sort of academic training have you had? And, there's not a hell of a lot of theory to negotiation, but there is some. And you should read one or two books before you actually venture into any kind of serious negotiation. And then, of course, for the professional competition, they're looking for experience as well. So don't just read a book and turn up at the competition. What is your view on training and experience? I mean, you and I have done quite a bit. You've studied negotiation on 3 continents. I've been to Harvard Law School twice. I think we see from the people that we negotiated with that they've had training, and it shows.
In terms of what the judges looked for, when I read the competition, it looks so complicated, the matrix, because it's sort of 15 elements that they judge you on. So I immediately flung it to one side and thought, oh, hell no, I'm not going to try to figure that out. But actually, when we did the debriefing, even though we didn't really focus on each element in our preparation, they actually did score us on these 15 elements.
I must say, I only read the 15 elements after the competition myself. But I suppose, we would have known this from previous training in negotiations.
There were two interesting things that sort of did speak to me in that information pack that we received. And I think I'd just like to say at this point how well this competition was organized.
Absolutely.
I don't think we maybe mentioned that in the beginning. Remy and Peter did a great job on a Thursday at midnight. You'd get your debriefing, you'd get your pack, you get your roles. You had 48 hours to complete it, and all the admin was sent to you on time. It was very easy to approach and well run because you're already in a competition and you don't really want to be thrown off by the admin side of things, especially when it's online. So I must just mention to Remy and Peter, they did a great job there. But in the pack that we received, there are two things that spoke to me. The one is an element they refer to as moral wisdom, which piqued my interest quite a bit. And the other thing was your opponents also get to have an input into your scoring because they rate you on a variety of elements as well. So I thought that was really interesting, and I really liked that possibility that could introduce into the negotiation style. That was quite interesting for me. But just getting back to the types of elements that they looked at, you've touched on one already, Derek, where they looked at people who were trained and experienced, who had some sort of background in it. Then they looked at, obviously critical to any negotiation is ability to listen actively and question how one is able to manage their emotions. And I think that goes back to your comment earlier about the boardrooms worldwide, where people just aren't able to do that or do the work that requires one to be able to manage your own ego and your own emotions, where you said, people were prepared to lose if it meant the other side lost even more. It's mad because it's true. You and I have seen that several times. As I mentioned, this case that I've just completed was a perfect case in point example of that. They also, going back to this matrix, looked at things like, do the negotiation parties understand the interests? And I think that's where having that diversity of thought and experience becomes so critical. How you set your stage, how you plan for your negotiation and that sort of thing.
Just on that point, it is quite strange how many people sometimes come into negotiation. You see it on the other side, and hopefully we don't make that mistake. But when the time comes to speak, negotiation is normally a 3-part process. You listen and then you speak and you come up with creative options to try and meet both parties' interests. And then they trade off sometimes. Sometimes it's necessary for trade-offs between the things that are of lesser importance to you but more important to them. And sometimes, you can do a very good negotiation without any trade-offs. Both sides can get everything that they want. Those are the ones that are really satisfying to deal with. So I think we had a case in point when we were negotiating on behalf of one of those role plays on behalf of an airline pilots union against the airline. And it turned out that one of the things in the scoreable elements, one of the things that was less important to them was overtime pay. And it was more important to us as a union. Just through a trade-off between overtime pay and basic salary, we actually scored more than double in the number of scoring points than the second place team. The way to do that, of course, is to exchange information. What's important to you and what's important to me? And, obviously you don't put all your cards on the table at once. Otherwise, I'd love to play poker with you. And if you say, I've got a pair of twos in my hand, but I'm betting $10. Nobody does that, of course, in negotiation. Understanding each other's interests.
Just on that point, in terms of if you get to the point where you understand each other's interests and there's been a good exchange of the quality of information that has passed, it really gets you to the space where you can generate creative options. So that role play you referred to with the airlines, it was only when we started getting to a good quality of level of information exchange that we could get to that point where we're like, hey, what about this? Because if you remember, that wasn't even a vague option on the sheet. We just sort of went completely off script there. That just shows you what's possible if you're not restricted or blinkered.
I always have this basic rule in any negotiation, in business in general. Always assume there's something that you don't know. It's always a good place to start. And then try and find out what that is. And in that case, we did. And paid off big time. Yeah, there are all kinds of things that came up. I sort of interrupted you with telling about all these 15 points that we look at. Team performance. I think as a team, we had agreed who's going to do what. I think that's very important. And you said, yeah, I was the number cruncher. I could step in with a comment when I saw that you perhaps were at a loss for words, which you weren't in general. That's the advantage of being two in a team. So you had your roles. You did most of the speaking. I chipped in from time to time. And then I was, of course, crunching the numbers. So that was my role. I think that worked pretty well for us.
A lot of my role was also just information extraction, just ask a lot of questions so that we could just be curious to see what the other side's interests really were. And I think one of the things that's so important that we did before was a lot of preparation. We did a lot of, for example, just going back to the airline case, we did a lot of research in terms of what the different salaries were for different personnel in the airline industry. So that was really useful because we could use objective criteria when we negotiated with the union, saying, okay, but in Europe, this seems to be a standard, or for a commercial airline, this seems to be the standard. So it's not like you were just coming up with numbers because they were fanciful, but they were anchored in some sort of benchmarking in place. And that lends a lot of credibility to you in a negotiation because the other side gets the message that there has been some preparation involved in the whole process. Yeah. So I think that's the one thing. And also just the other area that I noticed we were able to shift quite quickly. So even though we had our set roles, if I saw you going down one sort of trajectory that was useful for us, we needed to adapt our strategy on the fly really quickly and be agile in that way, especially if we noticed an opportunity that we didn't anticipate, but to be able to take advantage of that. So I think just being able to adapt to opportunities that come our way, and also if things are not going our way, not to hammer on about it and be dogged about something. Also know, okay, this is a point we just have to let go and move on. Otherwise, we're going to lose too much. So be able to be flexible there. When do you go for something or when do you let go? I think that tension one really needs to be able to get a certain level of comfort with, knowing beforehand that at some point you might have to let something go and be okay with that.
Yeah, the other day we did an interview with Wirtschaftswoche, which is, I think, the German version of The Economist, probably the most widely read business magazine in Germany. Remy had actually referred them to us because they thought we were pretty good at not only getting what we want, but improving the relationship at the same time. We didn't say that one of the things that they rated every team on was not only the quality of the substantive result, but also how the relationship developed, whether it improved or deteriorated or whatever. But in general, what was the relationship like? And of course, I would say good negotiators, they have two jobs. They have to obviously get a good deal for themselves, and you usually do that by getting good deals for others as well, but also building relationships. And part of the way you do that is get a good deal for the other side. And in general, we were rated quite highly on that. What do you think it was that people thought we were so good at in relationship building?
I think it goes back to that combination of the diversity of the team. Because we're quite different, we were looking to see what the needs of the opposing side was. Because of that, we could speak to their interests and build a relationship on that side. And I don't think when we were building the relationship, we were taking our eye off the ball in terms of the goal of the negotiation. I just believe that in achieving the goal of the negotiation, we didn't need to engage with our opposition in an adversarial way, because it just leaves everybody feeling pretty smarting and hurt, and it's just unnecessary, and it doesn't progress anything any further. So I think that comes from the diversity of our skill set, really. And also we both look for different things on an emotional level as well.
One must always, I think, go from the standpoint that even if it's a one-off deal, you might meet these people again. How you made them feel is always going to be important to them and can affect your future relationship. And yeah, we were rated 50-50. I mean, the team's got 50% for the substantive result, 50% for the relationship. So negotiating on Zoom, I think was a first for most of us, although most of the role plays were sort of based on pre-COVID stories. For instance, the airline pilots, we probably wouldn't get nearly the deal that we got for them now. It would have been a totally different negotiation. What is your view of negotiating on Zoom?
Well, there's pros and cons, like most things to do with technological platforms. The one is you have to make sure it's working and uninterrupted. I know we had a few near misses on a day or two because Eskom was doing its load shedding business. So there's that technological uninterrupted supply thing that's firstly required. And then from the actual negotiation in terms of preparation, even though you can see everybody, you don't really see the whole body. So it's a little bit more constricted and constrained.
Can't see the foot tapping, the knee jerks.
Exactly. From that perspective, it can be a little bit disempowering. And also when you're negotiating with a team, it's tough not to be able to see your team member right next to you or just scribble a little note discreetly. So from that perspective, it's not as smooth, but it can be overcome. You can go into a breakout room together. We just put the call on mute, although once or twice that did quite happen with us, but just put the call on mute and take a quick call on another device, on a normal telephone or whatever. So it can be overcome. Then, of course, in terms of the number crunching side of it or access to new information really quickly, if you've got your computer open, you can quickly Google something to check a fact, or you can quickly update your spreadsheet looking at the most recent offer. And so from that perspective, in terms of expediency, I think it was really helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Of course, we communicated on WhatsApp privately while we were in the Zoom talks, which is that's one of the advantages. I had spreadsheets open on other devices. So every offer that was made, we could immediately plug it into the what if spreadsheet and we see what the full outcome is. It also enabled us, this kind of spreadsheet thing which people can't see, and if one might feel very uncomfortable doing that across the boardroom table. We could quickly come up with multiple equivalent simultaneous offers, MISOs, as they say in the industry. So we could make offers, say there were 3 issues, A, B, and C. We could give various combinations of A, B, and C, which would give us a similar score, but might give them totally different scores. So that way you find out quickly what their preferences are, and then you take it from there. The one thing that's missing is eye contact. I always say, look at your camera, but it doesn't help looking at your camera if the person is looking at your picture. It's very difficult to gain proper eye contact. So that's something that takes getting used to.
But I mean, on the other hand, if you think about it, one day we were negotiating on 3 different continents, and that wouldn't have been possible. So,
absolutely,
just from that perspective, I think it was quite super.
Yeah, it was interesting that although we were the only team from sub-Saharan Africa or from Africa, there were a few Africans in other teams. We had a guy from Morocco sitting in Paris, another one from Senegal.
No, he was from Sudan. He was Sudanese. And he was studying in Japan.
Yeah, in Tokyo. We haven't covered all of the 15 things on this thing, but I think it might be helpful to just refer people to the website. Look at the Negotiation Challenge, TNC. Just Google it and you'll find all this information. And then, of course, what's next for us? I've been interested in negotiation for many years, and you obviously also been interested for not so many years. Fewer than me, a lot fewer than me. But, decided to become good at it like any skill and studied it. And then when she went to Harvard, and I think became pretty good at it. So you get to the stage with something like this. So what is our next step? Do we want to try and win another world championship? Well, if you don't come first, it's a step back. But what we can do, is train other people. And that would be and I think we've spoken about it, our goal would be to train the next world championships in both the student competition, which is in February, March, and the professional competition, which is next September. And we're going to do this training pro bono just because we love it. So how do you feel about that, partner?
I think it's absolutely wonderful. It will be so great to be able to increase the representation from Africa. As you mentioned in the student competition, there's only been one team that participated from Kenya. And okay, this was the first year that the professional competition was run, and we were the only team from Africa. So it would be wonderful to be able to increase our participation in these global competitions.
So if you're interested in how that's going to work, drop us a line, either put a comment on our website, which is www.not-just-business.com, or pop me an email at derek@derekpead.org. derek@derekpead.org. That's the email address. Anything that you want to add on this competition just before we say goodbye?
Just that it was such a privilege to be able to enter the competition with you and participate. It was a lot of fun. I know we had one or two bumpy experiences, but I always said if it stops being fun, we can't continue. And I think that we managed to achieve throughout the 4 weeks, because I don't know if we made it clear to the listeners that the competition ran for 4 weeks before the finals. It was just a little bit of a commitment, but it was so enjoyable. And I think the thing that for me sums it up the most was the learning. One, that you need to keep practicing. Otherwise, you do lose the skills a little bit. And just to be able to have a platform that enabled that was really, really fun. So for me, that's what it was all about.
The point we forgot to make in diversity, suddenly I'm just reminded of a quote by Tom Peters, the old management guru. His most famous book was In Search of Excellence. He said, if two people think exactly alike, fire one of them. Duplication is expensive. Now, when you have a diverse team, even if it's a small team like us, of course we're going to have differences of opinion. And that's crucial to have a difference of opinion. Otherwise, if people think alike, we'd be like Trump's White House. Nothing decent gets done. But when you have those differences of opinion, you've got to know how to handle it. The same skills that you would use in a relationship to manage difficult people, you need to use in your own team so that you don't derail the whole process.
I can't agree with you more. And sometimes that does get challenging because people might feel quite strongly about it and emotions might be a bit heightened. So it does get quite important to be able to just take a step back and say, okay, either be assertive with something to say, look, I think we need to talk about this, or say, okay, look, we need to manage this differently because I see that it could become problematic for us. Mm-hmm. And to have that level of honesty and openness in a situation like this and still manage the person. I think Remy mentioned it quite nicely. Be soft on the person and hard on the problem.
Yeah. Oh, as they say in the original classic, separate the people from the problem and deal with both.
It's not either or. You have to do both.
Thank you very much, Siham. It's been a pleasure chatting to you again. We see far too little of each other nowadays with the pandemic and all, but hopefully that'll change. And we can actually go to the real World Championships with our teams.
Oh, that would be really exciting. But let me take the opportunity to wish you and your family a safe and healthy time over this holiday period.
Thank you. And the same to you. Take care. Thank you very much.